All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I will be your host today. My name is Matt Sloan. I am the CEO and founder of Skyfire Consulting. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, we are a public safety UAS consulting company, and we are delighted to welcome our new partners today from AeroVigilance Consulting. We have Tom Adams and Casey Flanagan. So thank you guys so much for being a part of this today.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Appreciate it. It's good to be here and good to be working with you. So real quick, a little bit about myself. I'm a retired federal law enforcement agent. While I was in law enforcement, I was a special agent bomb technician for about 11 years, and I had a chance to work very closely with a lot of international, federal, state, and local law enforcement partners to include bomb technicians. It's a great part of my career. I spent the last 3 years of my FBI as a program manager in the counter UAS program, and in that capacity, I had a chance to deploy numerous times around the U.S. in support of some high-profile public events and venues, where we conducted authorized detection and mitigation missions. And these missions were really conducted in a lot of high-profile, complex urban environments, and many of which were around a lot of large mass gatherings. And I don't profess to have a lot of military counter UAS experience, but some of the homeland security type experience, operations and lessons learned will apply to non-permissive environments, especially if they're conducted in urban environments and such like that. It's a different mission set. But you'll hear a little bit more from Casey, but I'm the co-founder of AeroVigilance. But we are a training, consulting, and services company. And one of the goals that we have is to share our knowledge and experience that we've been fortunate enough to have gained over the last few years to increase the knowledge of the end users and increase the security to our homeland. So our experience is really, it isn't theory-based. It's literally based on thousands of hours of planning defense in-depth counter UAS operations, conducting numerous threat assessments, site surveys, setting up gear on tops of very tall buildings, and crawling through little crawl holes to get the best spot to put a lot of this gear. But it's, some of the people often describe it as like a CrossFit type session where you're hauling hundreds of pounds of gear, testing gear, troubleshooting, conducting operations, learning lessons, and ultimately refining a lot of operational procedures, because there was not a book for us to go by. We had to figure it out ourselves and learn those lessons. So that's kind of where we're at right now.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you being here. Casey, you want to give a brief intro there too?
Absolutely. Thanks, Matt. I'm Casey Flanagan, the other co-founder of AeroVigilance. My career, the last 13 years or so prior to me leaving the FBI, was in security technologies, communication technologies, and the last 2.5 of those years were in the counter UAS program. My entire background is in electronics and technology, and I applied the skill sets from those security and communications technologies to that, kind of figuring out, as Tom alluded to, how we're going to place this gear, what gear we're going to place in some of the, what I like to call least worst locations around the United States to run the counter UAS mission. It's a very difficult mission from the technology perspective, and we'll talk more about that during my portion of the presentation, getting into those different technologies.
Awesome. Well, really appreciate you being here as well too, and really appreciate the great partnership that we've established since you guys have left the Bureau. Of course, we have our own alumnus of the FBI, and Mike Rogers, who's our VP of Public Safety, and he was kind enough to introduce all of us, and it's been a pleasure working with you guys. We are primarily focused on the offensive or pro use of UAS, whereas you guys are more on the airspace and counter UAS awareness piece. I think our team was definitely lacking in knowledge on the counter UAS space. So thrilled to have you guys on board to kind of help us navigate that space. I think it's an incredibly important space to be navigating. As we talk about the offensive use of drones or the pro use of drones. I hate to use that word offensive, but using drones for good. We also need to be aware of the airspace around us and aware of what other drones are in that airspace and what their intentions are. So I think this is, the two definitely go hand in hand, and I'm excited for you guys to be able to share that. knowledge with our audience today. So we will get started here with the presentation. I'll go ahead and pull that up for you guys. Just as I mentioned, this is kind of our brief introduction of what Skyfire is. We're a full service UAS consulting company for public safety, but also as well for critical infrastructure and private industry, like private security in particular. We've helped develop more than 600 UAS programs across the country, and have actually run into these guys in the best way possible when we were doing Overwatch for Super Bowl 53 there in Atlanta. So you guys are going to kind of talk through what AeroVigilance is too. So I'll shut up and turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. So yeah, I talked a little bit about what AeroVigilance does, and we'll kind of have some little tidbits throughout the presentation too. But as I mentioned before, we do have extensive experience in Homeland Security counter UAS operations, which kind of has a different flavor than maybe something in a non-permissive type military environment. But there are certainly some intersections where those two can really enhance each other with a different knowledge and experience to that. And then the other thing that we spend a lot of time, or we have some experience in, is conducting investigations related to the suspected nefarious use of UAS at critical infrastructure and those types of things. And then also, developing a counter UAS program. A counter UAS program or a counter UAS is not just the deployment and use of technology. It also includes, policies, procedures, training, mentoring, kind of that whole program development. You need to have all those pieces. It's not just that one slice. But next slide, Matt. So real quick, kind of going into introducing what counter UAS is. I think one of the big things that's important to frame during this time frame is that in the United States, there's a little bit of I shouldn't say a little bit. There's a definite legal and regulatory landscape in the United States. It's really very important for people to understand, in our homeland. So the big thing that I want to mention is that this legal portion of the brief, the reference I'm using for this is a really good document that was written by the Department of Justice, Department of Homeland Security, the Federal Aviation Administration, and the Federal Communications Commission. It was published in August of 2020. And really the goal of it was meant to take some of the legal jargon from some of the legislation and put it into a more palatable form that somebody without a law degree like myself can understand. And the title of the document is The Advisory on the Application of Federal Laws to the Acquisition and Use of Technology to Detect and Mitigate Unmanned Aircraft Systems. It's a pretty long title. And where that, one thing I want to mention real quick, there's a whole group of documents that we've already consolidated into a great reference for people. If you haven't been to cuashub.com, there's a lot of news articles on the website. There's vendors, product, services, events, and jobs. But one of the big things there is if you go into the resources area, the entire website is free to access, but the resources area requires just a simple free registration. But you get access to a multimedia library that includes open source. It's all open source information, but it's textbooks, references, publications, academic papers, white papers, reports, and such. But the document that I just mentioned, the Advisory on the Application of Federal Laws, that's in the laws, legislation, and regulations category. So there's a whole bunch of references there that'll help to increase your knowledge and perspective of this complicated security mission. So if you get a chance, check them out. I highly recommend it. So I just want to throw that out there real quick. Next slide, please. All right, so since I'm doing some sort of a legal brief, I'm going to put a disclaimer out there on some of the information that I'm about to provide to you, and there's a reason for that. One, this information is for informational purposes only, and it shouldn't be construed as any sort of legal advice. I've been in too many legal briefings, so that's where I got a lot of that wording from. But I'm actually going to pull some wording straight out of that advisory that I told you about, and you'll kind of get to understand a little bit more as you learn about some of the laws and regulations and limitations and restrictions that we have in the on counter UAS in the United States. It'll kind of make a little bit more sense. But one of the things that document says is that it strongly recommends that prior to the testing, acquisition, installation of or use of UAS detection and mitigation systems, that you seek counsel that's experienced with both federal, state, criminal, surveillance, and communications laws. It's really important because there are a lot of technologies that may break those those different rules and regulations, which we'll talk a little bit more about in depth. And then the other thing that the document recommends, which I completely agree with, is that don't rely on what you're being told, whether the technology is legal or not. Make sure you do your own analysis, and base it on the system's functionality. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a couple of slides down the road. But it's really important that you stay within those left and right limits within the homeland. It is restrictive, but there are some logical reasons around that. But I still think that there's a lot that we can do within the constraints that we have, and hopefully in the future, some of those constraints will expand as we show some responsibility to handle what we're working within now. So next question, or next slide, please. So under the current counter UAS landscape, a couple things to keep in mind that makes this a little bit more complicated than maybe in a non-permissive environment type overseas. One of the things to keep in mind is that a drone or the controller, the phone, the tablet, or the laptop, or any those types of things within the uncrewed aircraft system, it's possible that they may be considered a computer, and there's legal concerns around that too. So a computer is basically a device that performs logical operations or processes data, and there's a little bit more of a defined definition of what a computer is in the legal textbooks that I'm not going to go over. But just kind of keep in mind that that components of that system may be considered a computer. We all know, or many of us know out there, that most drones right now, they are controlled via wireless communication. Whether that's communication from the ground control station to the drone, or it's through a cellular network, or it may even be through satellite communications. And that's how the majority of the drones are controlled now, or there may be data links that are coming through those modalities too. In the future, there may be less and less of that, but right now the majority of drones are controlled via that type of manner. And then the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, is the entity that manages the spectrum in the United States. And then there's a lot of various laws related to the interception of wireless communications or interrupting wireless communications that come into play, which is again why it's recommended that you speak with a counsel that's really understands those types of laws. And then when it comes to the functionality of the systems, it's possible that either the functionality of the systems or how it's used or deployed, it may end up impacting the public's privacy, civil rights, and civil liberties. And that concern is actually, it's on the minds of a lot of lawmakers. They want to make sure that the use of this type of technology does not impact the public's First and Fourth Amendment rights, and a lot of their decisions may be based on that. So there are some things that we need to keep in mind with this technology. And then last, I'm going to go a little bit more on the next slide, but the legal definition of an aircraft. A drone is actually considered to be an aircraft, believe it or not. So next slide, Matt. So by statute, a drone is an aircraft that is operated without the possibility of direct human intervention from within or on the aircraft. So, and if you look at what the definition of an aircraft is there on the slide, you can see that there's a legal equivalent that drone is considered to be the same as an aircraft, and that impacts the mitigation technologies, how those mitigation technologies are being used. So if you were to mitigate an aircraft, or mitigate a drone, you're technically impacting an aircraft, and there's various legal statutes that go with that. So next slide, please. So one of the reasons why this ends up being so confusing, there are numerous laws and regulations regarding the use of drone detection and mitigation equipment in the United States. Some of the various provisions of U.S. Criminal Code are enforced by the DOJ, and then there's also various federal laws and regulations that are administered by the Federal Aviation Administration, the Federal Communications Commission, and the Department of Homeland Security And something else to keep in mind is that there may be state and local laws that might be implicated by the use of some of these detection and mitigation technologies. But when you take all that together, a drone is an aircraft. There's going to be likely going to be some sort of a computer involved, most likely wireless communications, and you have privacy and civil liberties concerns. That's why this landscape is so complicated right now, and why our lawmakers are, kind of going the crawl, walk, run approach as they expand these types of authorities out. And in some cases, people might call it the crawl, and then maybe we'll get to the walk and then run side of things, but we're still working on that. So, it's possible, and I'll talk about it a little bit more on the next slide too, about kind of clearing up some misunderstandings about what it means to have what constitutes something that's legal versus illegal. But it's possible that some of the drone detection functionality could violate the Wiretap Act. So if there's a wireless signal and there's information being derived from that RF signal, it's possible that it may be violating the Wiretap Act. And when it comes to drone mitigation, there's a number of different federal laws that it may violate, to include the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. Remember, we talked about how drone or the other components in the system may be a computer. Depending on how that drone is navigating through the airspace, it may be impacting wireless communication. So if you're to jam or to do a cyber takeover or to spoof or any of those types of things, that may implicate some federal laws. And then, of course, because a drone is an aircraft, it may impact some, the Aircraft Sabotage Act, Piracy Act, and things like that. So, and then the other thing that isn't mentioned on this slide is that, you have to keep in mind that there's potential civil liability that may come from the use of UAS detection and mitigation equipment. So, for example, if you mitigate a drone and personal there's damage to a person's or property, that could end up being some other things that you would have to consider too with the use of this types of equipment. So, next slide, please. All right, so the current counter-UAS landscape, I kind of talked about some of the restrictions. There's really only 4 federal agencies at this time that have the statutory relief for the operations of this gear in operational type environments, and that's the Department of Justice, Department of Homeland Security, Federal Communications Commission, and the the Department of Justice, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Energy, and Department of Defense. Those are the ones that have the current authority to violate provisions of Title 18 and 49. Now, the FAA, they have authorities to do some testing and understanding the hazards of using the counter-UAS detection and mitigation equipment in and around airports. So, as part of the 2018 FAA Reauthorization Act, they've got some authorities to do some testing, those types of stuff. So the FAA technically does have some authorities to do that kind of stuff. So why does that really matter? So we talked about a little bit about it before, but the functionality of some of the technologies may violate provisions of federal laws and regulations. So some people are under the understanding that it has to do whether if it's detection or mitigation that it may violate, and that's not true. There's also some people have the understanding that if it's an active system, in other words, it emits RF versus passive, and then that's listening, that's how you determine whether it's legal or not. But it's actually what it is. It's based on the functionality of the system and how it's used. So just keep in mind it's what the system does and not a specific category that you need to be looking at. And in addition to the legal side of things, there are some negative impacts of the use of the technology on the national airspace system. It could impact the radio frequency spectrum, and it could, impact public safety, the people that you're trying to protect to begin with, or the critical infrastructure you're trying to protect. So, next slide, please. All right, so the Biden administration National Action Plan for Counter-UAS. Some of you have probably seen this. It was introduced back in April of 2022, so about 9 months ago or so. And the National Action Plan for Counter-UAS provided a number of different recommendations. And I've got a couple of them up there on the slides, but one of the big things that I think is good for people to understand is that the Biden plan looked to expand some of the counter-UAS authorities out into state, local, tribal, territorial law enforcement agencies, as well as starting to add some provisions for critical infrastructure owners and operators to begin to protect their critical infrastructure. There's some. One of the provisions was established a U.S. government authorized detection equipment that avoids any disruption to the airspace or communication spectrum, like what I talked about earlier. And then it talked about starting to expand. I mentioned the 4 agencies before: DOJ, DHS, DOE, and DOD. One of the recommendations is to expand that authority out into some selected state and law enforcement agencies, who would then go through a school that would be established, and they would learn how to properly deploy and use that type of equipment. There's a number of other different provisions in there. It's worth taking a look if you haven't seen it. Key thing to kind of keep in mind is that there was some legislation introduced in the summer that had a lot of the elements of the Biden National Action Plan for Counter-UAS, but the legislation didn't really get too far. And then the DOJ and DHS authorities that they received from the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2018, they actually expired in early December, and they were kept active through a series of temporary, continuing resolutions with the budget until the end of December. And then when President Biden signed the $1.7 trillion government spending package, that it basically extended the DOJ and DHS authorities until the end of September of 2023. And now it's up to the new legislative session to tackle expanding potentially reauthorizing, hopefully, DOJ and DHS, but also potentially expanding authorities out beyond the 4 agencies that I mentioned before. So it's a challenge to kind of work through that as an industry. The authority can be given, and can also be taken away, which is why it's so important for us to responsibly work within the framework that we've been given, so that we can continue to move the industry forward, and more importantly, keep our communities and critical infrastructure safe that we're trying to protect. So next slide, please, Matt. All right, so I've kind of was talking a lot of doom and gloom with what you can't do. Let's talk about what you can do, right? That's the most important thing. There are things that entities can do now to start to achieve airspace awareness and security. And airspace awareness and security is really part of the framework of counter-UAS that we should all kind of be thinking about. Getting that airspace awareness is not really just the implementation of technology, which everybody is really very heavily focused on. So there's a lot of things that we can be doing now. Some of those include some left of launch initiatives and procedures. So some of that could include implementing policies and procedures. And what policies do is they provide some general guidelines that outline an organization's plan for tackling the airspace awareness and security issues. So they can provide a bridge between the organization's security vision and its day-to-day operations. So they end up being really important. And what the procedures will do is they can explain specific actions for carrying out the counter-UAS policy. So that would help, that basically would be a blueprint for how to deal with specific situations. So some examples may be, what happens when a security person detects a drone visually at night? What sort of policies and procedures do you work through? What sort of procedures do you work through to determine what your next steps are? What is your security response to verified drone detections, whether it's a visual drone detection or you're using some sort of a legally authorized technology? What happens if a drone crashes inside of your facility? What sort of response procedures do you have there? Do you call the local bomb squad to do a threat assessment of the drone to see if it's carrying a hazardous package or some sort of a package, or do you turn it over to law enforcement? What sort of forensic examinations are being done? How is that information shared? That type of stuff. What happens if you have or interact with a drone pilot who's flying over your facility? What if your facility is an unrestricted airspace, or what if it's in restricted airspace? What are the things that you're going to be doing? How do you interact and work with law enforcement? How do you share information, or how do you deconflict authorized drone operations with your airspace awareness and security operation or counter UAS operation? Because the airspace is getting to be more and more complex. You're going to have authorized public safety. You're going to have authorized commercial operations. You're going to have drone deliveries. The airspace is getting to be more and more complex. And it's important for people that are doing this airspace awareness and security mission that they just don't, you have to do this very methodically and very logically, because there are actions that can be taken that could have a really big negative impact on the airspace and security that we have to keep in mind. So, the other thing I'll mention too is training. This is not a simple mission, and therefore, a thorough training program based on relevant counter UAS operational deployment experience, I think, is important to have in the homeland. We're going to have more information about our training program in the future, but we're really excited to roll that out soon. Keeping up with the UAS threat is important. There's a lot of good open source intelligence out there. And there's a lot of lessons learned from what's going on around the world, whether it's on the border, suspected prison drops, things happening overseas and other conflicts, kind of watching what people do, how they react, and how they react to other people reacting is a big thing, because this threat is always going to continue to evolve, and we have to watch what's going on and react appropriately, or even start to try to get a couple steps ahead as to what we should be doing. So paying attention to what's going on around you is going to be pretty important. And going back to the technology piece, there are tools that you can potentially deploy now that do not violate federal laws or FAA rules or FCC rules and regulations. So there may be some radio frequency detection tools that you could integrate into your physical security profile now, and also some potential radar, EOIR cameras and acoustic sensors. But again, speak with someone who's knowledgeable about U.S. Surveillance laws. That type of stuff is really important. So that's the part that I have. I want to transition a little bit over to Casey. Casey's going to give a basic overview of some of the common counter UAS equipment that might be deployed, and go into some other detail on some other relevant matters.
Before you jump in, Casey, too, I just want to add to for all the folks watching on LinkedIn and Facebook and YouTube, feel free to make comments and ask questions. I'm actually monitoring all the comments here too, so as we get questions, we can pose them to these gentlemen, and I will turn it back over to you, Casey.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. And thanks, Tom, for that intro and brief. I think it's very important that everybody understands the legal ramifications around counter UAS, because it can be so complex, and it honestly, it will impact the entire industry if people are operating illegally and infringing on people's rights. So let's get into the technology piece of this. Next slide, please. I think that's the end of. All right, so technologies that support the mission. We're going to look at this from kind of the 10,000 foot view. We're not going to get into the real deep weeds of the different technologies and all that. We're going to give a good overview of what technologies are out there, the considerations of those technologies, the different pros and cons a little bit. So next slide, please. Detection technologies are up first. And those are sensors that allow someone to see the drone, the uncrewed aircraft system, or its ground control station, the controller. And that can be done through a variety of modalities: radio frequency detection, radio detection and ranging, acoustic, or cameras. Next slide, please. First, we're going to talk about radio frequency. This is by far the most common right now. There are a lot of different technologies out there that leverage radio frequency detection and how they do it. but really you're receiving those radio frequency transmissions from the drone or the controller. And that's either the protocol or the command and control signal that drone is on using. A lot of people are familiar with like OcuSync through the DJI aircraft, or there's Dragon Link, Mavlink. Apparently there's a lot with Link in it. Also the video signal can be detected and kind of fingerprinted, as that is an emission signal for video. A lot of those technologies are using libraries of pre-recorded signatures, and it cross-references the received signals against those signatures to give you an ID. The range of these systems does vary based on environment and the RF noise floor, and particularly in how your system is tuned to listen through that environment. The most popular drone control protocols are in the US are in the unlicensed band of 2.4 gigahertz and 5.8 gigahertz. And those bands are very noisy. There's a lot of Wi-Fi technologies out there that are using those same things. So it has to be very good at listening for those signals and seeing that fingerprint. Maintaining the library is crucial to the detection, because even things like a firmware change on that radio frequency or that protocol can change the characteristics enough that it makes that library out of date or that signature out of date. Thing with radio frequency detectors, they will not detect RF silent drones. So GPS waypoint missions, they will not detect. Optical flow navigation, this is becoming more popular, and it's improving in its efficacy of navigation across terrain using the cameras to navigate that terrain based on a pre-described path. Next slide, please. Acoustic. All right, so this is listening for that buzz of a drone, and that can be everything from a small, your mini drones to all the way up to your big octos. They have kind of a unique signature of frequency that comes off of those propellers. Acoustic sensors typically have filters that will try to ignore the things in the environment that may affect its detection ability, like HVAC systems, wind noise, that kind of thing. But certainly those are factors in how well the acoustic systems will work. They're in a short to medium range, and this is a physical property of a drone that, it's hard to mask. There just recently was a new paper about toroidal propellers that decreased the audio signature, and the big part of that was for drone deliveries within neighborhoods, making things quieter. But now it also makes it a little harder to hear it. So it's definitely something that's important, but it is still hard to mask. So it will become a more important capability as drones move away from those traditional RF protocols and go into your GPS waypoint missions or LTE technologies, cellular command and control. Next slide, please. All right, radio detection and ranging. Everybody knows radar. It's very popular, but seeing a very small device is very specialized in the airspace. But that transmits an RF signal, and the radar receives that reflected signal from the object. And some of those radars use reflections from spinning objects to create the probability of drone detection. And so that's kind of the Doppler effect that comes off of that spinning device. And that gives you an idea that that is in fact a drone in the airspace and not a bird or something similar. Radar can point other technologies like cameras to identify that radar track and confirm it is what it thinks it is. But there are false positives from radar. It certainly happens. You have to tune it to your environment. Other spinning things like hubcaps, HVAC fans can certainly trigger some of those false positives. This will also become an important capability as drones move away from those traditional RF protocols for the same reason. Physical detection of the aircraft is important in not just counter UAS, but also in airspace awareness and security. Next slide, please. All right, cameras. There's a variety of different camera technologies that are capable of helping with the mission. And those are electro-optical, so in your visible spectrum, what the naked eye can see, in infrared and hyperspectral technologies. Those two technologies are looking beyond your what your eye can see, and kind of the reflections of the different materials, or in the infrared spectrum with the heat and those types of benefits. Now, you pair cameras with an analytics algorithm driven by an engine, and it does pixel recognition of different aircraft types, and it can be cued by the other equipment, like mentioned in radar. So using a radar and camera together is a very powerful tool, and it's useful for that positive identification and threat information on what you're seeing in your airspace. There's one thing that you can never capture from any of these technologies is the intent of that drone in your airspace. And so you need to gather intel on that drone. And the best way to do it is with a camera, and understanding, does it have a payload? Is it the type of drone that my system thinks it is? And other identifying factors like that. Also a very important capability as the industry evolves. Next slide, please. We're briefly going to talk about mitigation technologies. There's a lot of different ways to disrupt, disable, or seize control of a drone. So we're just going to hit some of the high points with this. RF jamming, you're disrupting that command and control link. Projectiles, you're trying to destroy that aircraft or components on the aircraft. Cyber takeover, you're convincing the drone to listen to you. A laser, you're looking to overheat those components, melt it, or overwhelm the sensors with a dazzling effect to confuse its navigation. A net, you can capture or disable that aircraft. High power microwave, you're disabling those electronics within the aircraft. Collision, crashing a drone or some device into another drone. And GPS and GNSS jamming, you're denying that navigation information. Every one of these mitigation technologies, when used in the homeland, increases the risk to public safety or to what you're trying to protect. Any disruption of that control signal or the aircraft's intended flight path, you're not sure what's going to happen afterwards. If one type of protocol in its RF, using an RF jammer on that protocol, it may do a return to home protocol. But if you jam a different type of protocol, it may just fall out of the sky, and it may hit its intended target anyways. Next slide, please. So talking about all these technologies, you need to understand that there is no silver bullet for drone detection mitigation. Everything is a system of systems, and looking at a layered defense strategy. So even within your layered defense, you need to have different types of RF detectors. Different libraries will have different protocols within them, and even how the protocols are categorized and how they're analyzed within that library is different based on the RF engineer that did it. Different cameras, acoustic, radar, and that's just within your detection, just to understand that something is in your airspace so that you can see those RF signals, so that you can hear those drones coming, so that you can see physically through a radar signature that something else is in your airspace. Next slide, please. The evolution. So where is counter going? Because right now, counter UAS is a big word in the industry, and counter, in our minds, will become integral with airspace awareness, security, and that uncrewed traffic management, your UTM. As Tom alluded to, the airspace is getting more complicated. And while we'll know through different sensors and remote ID and different types of UTM, we'll know the good guys in the airspace, but there will also need to be an awareness of those potentially nefarious actors trying to blend in with that traffic. And being able to counter those threats is highly important. So systems that we are using today legally, and then those systems that are also being used by those 4 federal entities in the United States, those will fold in to understanding your airspace and what you can do about what's in that airspace. An advantage of those detection systems is it will enable beyond visual line of sight operations. Enabling those operations will start to enhance things like drone as a first responder programs, drone delivery, anything that drone can be used for as a tool will certainly become better as those detection systems get better and have better understanding of what's in their airspace. And that's my section. So we can open up for questions, Matt?
Yeah, no, that would be great. Thank you guys both for going through all that. So a couple of questions that I have, and some we're going to watch to get some questions from the audience. You mentioned briefly remote ID. Where does remote ID fit into all of this, and what factor will that play in all this?
I'll take that one. I'm actually going to be writing on that fairly soon. So a lot of people are familiar with remote ID. It was introduced a few years ago. Very controversial. Around 50,000 plus comments regarding remote ID. Basically, the landscape around remote ID has evolved over time to the point where right now manufacturers are working to become compliant with the remote ID rule. It's going to be in effect later on this year, but remote ID is not going to be the end all be all. It's not going to be the silver bullet for determining whether something is a threat. It's not going to be the silver bullet for detecting everything in the airspace. So just kind of give you a brief overview, not every drone is going to be broadcasting remote ID. If the drone's flying in a FRIA, which is kind of like an area that's been reserved for drones to fly in, where they don't have to have that remote ID broadcast module, that's, those drones won't be broadcasting. What I read the other day, just kind of clarifying some of the stuff going on with remote ID, unless your drone is being used for commercial purposes, if it weighs less than 250 grams, it's not going to be required to broadcast remote ID. So there's going to be new drones that are going to already have that technology ingrained into it. And then for drones that are already built, there's going to be methods in which you can comply with the remote ID requirements. It'll be interesting to see, one, how far the remote ID signal will be broadcasted and what the density of receivers are going to be needed in order to be able to detect that drone in the airspace. So, a few weeks ago, I had a conversation with somebody. I said, well, if they're not broadcasting remote ID, then you would automatically consider them to be a threat. And I asked, well, how do you know they're not broadcasting remote ID? Because they may be broadcasting, but due to RF interference, terrain, buildings, or just the weakness of the signal, maybe just not going very far, your density of sensors, maybe it is broadcasting remote ID, but you're just not detecting it. So you're still going to have to rely on the traditional RF detection technologies that Casey mentioned. The remote ID piece is going to be one data point that you will consider when you're doing your airspace awareness and security mission. It's just one piece of it. Now, the other thing to keep in mind too is that someone could be broadcasting remote ID, and you may be detecting that remote ID signal, but they still may be up to something nefarious. So you can't use remote ID as a determination if something is a threat or not. You have to look at the overall scheme of things. You have to look at all the information that you have available to you to really make that determination. It's a data point, but it's not the data point.
Yeah, no, and you're definitely going to make a lot of enemies if you start mitigating drones that aren't broadcasting remote ID just simply because you can't detect it. So it's going to cause problems for sure. I think as an industry, we're still trying to wrestle with remote ID and kind of figure out what it's going to mean for any of us. So I appreciate that insight there. So this is, just asking your guys' opinion on this. You talked about, eventually this authority will get delegated down to the state, local, territorial, and tribal community. What do you think? What is that going to look like? What pathway will that take? I mean, I know there's some precedent here from the FBI or from the Department of Justice with the bomb techs, where that's sort of wrangled by the FBI and then the training occurs through the FBI. Do you have has there been discussion on what that might look like and what agencies they might be targeting first to give that authority to?
Yeah, so I'll answer the last question first. I don't know the answer to which agencies will be chosen. I think hopefully when we get to that point, that they may look at a wide variety of agencies to determine who they're going to bring into the pilot program. And I would imagine that there's going to be iterations of various agencies that go through this training platform in order to be able to have this authority. The concept around a school, the FBI has for many years run the Hazardous Devices School, which trains all public safety bomb technicians in the United States. So, you can take a bomb technician from the Seattle Police Department and you can pluck them over into the bomb squad with the Richmond, Virginia Police Department, and they've gone through the same training skills, and they use the same types of equipment. So it's very standardized training, and all the bomb squads, public safety bomb squads, have gone through training certification, both basic and advanced, through one school. So it's very standardized, and I think that when you start putting this counter drone authority into other state and local entities, hopefully when that time comes, you need to standardize the training in the same sort of way. It can't just be a wild, wild west sort of thing. Everybody needs to be following the same policies, procedures, using the same types of equipment that fall within the legal guidelines. They need to be going through the same processes and procedures to be able to use equipment in different environments. It all needs to be done very methodically and very thoughtfully, because, as I mentioned before, if we were to just kind of have a wild, wild west environment where people are doing what they want, we're going to find that we're going to have some problems really quick, and that's not the way that we want to execute this mission.
Yeah, no, that certainly makes a lot of sense. So, taking this to a practical level, you are a business chief security officer. You're a public safety agency, you're a prison, you're a sports stadium, you're having problems with nuisance drones. Maybe you even have detection capability to know that there is a problem. What can you do under current legal authority? What would you advise somebody to do if they are having a problem with a drone?
Yeah, Casey, I've been talking a lot. You want to handle this one? I'll toss the ball to you.
Yeah. So, currently there are a lot of technologies that are legal to use, various RF detection technologies that look at the fingerprint of that protocol and can locate either the controller or the drone based on time, distance of arrival, and other techniques like that. You have your radar, you have your camera, you can identify drones in your airspace around your facility that you're trying to protect. So there's that piece, the technology. But how are you supporting that technology with a program? Build your program and policies. Like, what are you actually doing about these drones, and what are you doing to educate your community? What are you doing educating internally? Because sometimes these drones can be dangerous, and they also have concerns around them. If one of your personnel decides to try and take a drone out with a metal pole, that's a federal violation, because it is regulated as an aircraft, even though it's doing something illegal. It's a difficult problem, but you need to understand that getting those policies and procedures in place to support your airspace awareness and security technologies that you'll eventually implement is very important as a first step.
No, and that's great. And of course, we keep talking about this term airspace awareness, which I think is so critical to come back and hit on, which is, understanding that there's drones there, understanding that there may be a possibility someday of mitigating that threat is important, but also just being aware of what's around you too. As a drone pilot, as a manned aircraft pilot myself, understanding what's around me, what airspace is around me, what airplanes are around me, and helicopters and all that kind of stuff. And I think that's super critical too. So it's not just about getting them out of the way necessarily, but knowing, I think, is half the battle. Certainly knowing what's there. You also, Tom, you mentioned DFR, or Casey, you mentioned DFR at the end of your presentation there too, and I think that's another kind of critical piece. I think we could probably spend a whole other webinar talking about airspace awareness and DFR. But as public safety agencies around the country are asking for more and more permissions to do things with drones, to go beyond line of sight, UAS detection is going to be critical, because the skies are getting busier. We are certainly hearing more and more stories of Walmart and Amazon and all the other players, starting to put their drones in the air and deliver packages. And so it's not just about what helicopters, what airplanes are in the air now. We also have to be concerned with the UAS as well. We have another question here. So we've all heard, and seen the news reports out of Central and South America about anti-drone guns used during the Brazilian inauguration. How concerned were you guys when you saw that? What was the thought process there from guys who have been on that side of the fence?
Related to the drone guns, I mean, some of those technologies, depending on the use case, like when it comes to executive protection, in this particular case, it was a mobile mitigation system that security force was deploying in order to protect their protectee. They're protecting their assets. So, depending on the use cases, there's a lot of different ways in which these systems can be used and deployed. They can be used for mobile operations, whether it's ground, maritime. As such, there are UAS-based detection and mitigation platforms that are on, that are up in the air that provide you different capabilities than maybe something on the ground. So there's a wide variety of use cases out there. What's interesting, studying being in the industry and then studying close to 300 to 400 counter UAS product and service companies over the past 6 to 9 months. There is a variety of technology and services out there that they've used some existing technologies, but then a lot of companies are being very innovative in creating some of their own technologies to meet different needs within the drone and counter drone industry. And it's been really fascinating to meet a lot of those different companies that are providing these different types of products and services. They're very innovative from creating their own red team type fleets, or having some aerial targets to open source intelligence, to red teaming, and developing acoustic technologies or different drone based net capture systems and things like that. So there's a lot of innovation in the industry with a lot of really competent professionals who are doing what they can to help secure our public and our critical infrastructure. And that's one of the cool things about this industry. It's very, very close, very tight-knit group of people. There's really only about 2 degrees of separation between any one person within the industry. But there's really a lot of really good work going on with the industry. And it's definitely something to keep an eye on. As the drone threat progresses, you're going to see a lot of technologies and techniques and procedures that are going to have to progress along with that. And I did notice in something too, someone put in the chat, LinkedIn user, if that is your real name, they mentioned something about about DIY modified drones posing a problem for RF standard detection. And you're keeping abreast of what's going on within the UAS community, whether it's the commercial off the shelf, or some of the different drones being built for public safety and commercial purposes, as well as the DIY, the hobby drone area. Keeping up with some of those technologies is crucial to being a good airspace and awareness person, a counter UAS operator, whatever you want to call it. When we spent our time in federal service, we learned very quickly that the more of a drone nerd you are, and I mean that in a good way, is that the better you're able to make better decisions regarding the use and deployment of technology, and you're able to understand the ecosystem a lot better. Because if you're only thinking that you're worried about DJI drones, you're missing most of the puzzle, because there's a lot of innovation going on in the DIY world. And it's not the DIY that I don't consider the DIY pilots a problem. There's some great talented pilots out there doing some amazing stuff. A lot of them are doing commercial camel work and things like that, and some of them are just hobby recreationalists. But it's a good idea to keep abreast of what sorts of technologies and things that they're using, because the components are getting smaller, the batteries are becoming more efficient, the drones are becoming faster. If you've never seen an X-wing drone, I highly recommend looking it up on YouTube. It's scary, but yeah, keeping up with that technology is really important.
Yeah, no, I think that's so important, and you're absolutely right about the the size of the drone industry as well as the counter drone industry. Everybody knows everybody, and we've all, come cross paths in some form or fashion. But what's interesting about that too, and this is one of the reasons I really like partnering with you guys, is because you guys are very much agnostic as far as which systems are the best and which systems to use, and which vendors, much like we are at Skyfire. So we work with people that are competitors with one another, different drones, different softwares, different training opportunities too, because we all are trying to arrive at the same conclusion, which is the ability to pilot UAS safely in our national airspace system. So really appreciate that you guys are open to all of the different technologies that are out there. Small tease here, but for those of you in the Huntsville area or near the Huntsville area, we will actually be holding a UAS and counter UAS industry day in May. So look forward to some more information coming soon, and the three of us will be out there. I had another question come in about public and private land. How does that play into the UAS and counter UAS piece too? I mean, at this point, the FAA doesn't make that distinction, but certain states are interested in regulating that. So how does that factor in when you guys are evaluating a set of circumstances for a counter UAS application?
That's a good question. I haven't had that one before. Right now, I don't know how much that would change anything, because it's whether you're in downtown LA or whether you're out in the middle of a field in Oklahoma or North Carolina, the rules and regulations don't change based on the geography. So I still think you have to work within that framework. Maybe in the future there will be some more leeway or considerations based on the location that might allow for some greater possibilities or opportunities. But to my knowledge, I'm not aware of any differentiation between rural versus urban or anything like that.
Oh, great. We have another comment here. Like mentioned, there's no silver bullet in counter UAS. A layered system of systems is the way to move forward, but always tailored to the site-specific needs. So deploying RF jamming and an FOB is something different around airports, which obviously is a very critical distinction to make. So are we going to start to see, well, maybe you can't talk about this, maybe you can, I don't know. Are we going to start to see more counter UAS stuff deployed around airports? Is that something that's being looked at? And are we expecting that to change the way we travel in any way?
Yeah, so I don't have any specific information related to that. I can tell you that the FAA, if you look at Section 383, the 2018 FAA Reauthorization Act, you'll see that the FAA has authorities to do some testing and hazard mitigation around that. And if you look at the news, you'll see that they are out. If you Google that, you'll see that they are actually out doing some testing and such. I don't know what the results of that testing are, what types of equipment they're using or anything like that, but I would imagine that someday in the near future we'll get to hear more about that and what sort of technologies impacted or didn't impact, or what was the impact on the navigation systems or the lighting or anything like that around the airports that they're concerned about. So it'll be interesting to see what they come up with. I don't know what those results are, but I know that there's a lot of tremendous work being done at the FAA to kind of understand that a lot more.
No, and to the FAA's credit, we have not had an incident, major incident in an airport. I know we all saw what happened at Heathrow a couple of years back, and we're all starting to get very concerned about that. So I think that's a testament to the credit of, both the DOT and the FAA under them, and then of course the Department of Justice and all the work that you guys did. So, we don't have any other questions. We're coming up on an hour here. Is there anything else you guys wanted to chat about before we wrap this up? And we will be doing more of these specific to certain industries. So we'll spend some time doing a webinar on related to public safety use of counter UAS technologies, also in critical infrastructure, sports and events and things like that. So look forward to that. But in the meantime, anything else we want to hit before we let these folks get back to their day?
But I did notice that someone else put some stuff in there about no silver bullet. Talking about RF jamming, and the audience is correct. We've got a lot of knowledgeable folks in the audience, but each site has its own intricacies and things that may impact the types of gear you use and how you use them. So there's no one size fits all counter UAS system. There's no silver bullet. And that's one of the reasons you mentioned kind of being equipment agnostic. There's a lot of great equipment providers, product and service suppliers out there. And that's, from the standpoint that we are operating within, is that we would like to understand what the user's needs are, understand what the environment is. And then from there, you can determine, maybe some potential choices for a client to be able to pick the system or systems that work best for them. So you have to kind of look at this thing. There's just no cookie cutter way to do anything. Every environment's different with the RF noise floor, the terrain, buildings, considerations for safety, critical infrastructure, things like that. It's just every location's a new adventure in itself.
No, that's fantastic. We have another comment coming in here. This has been a great forum and discussion due to the increasing call volume for UAS. Thank you. We appreciate that. One of the solutions we use is an increased education and training for our patrol division. Our UAS team teaches a class, patrol response for UAS, which has been successful. We have a few years of experience with major events and concerts. And I think we're seeing a lot of that. I think that's, coming soon to a public safety training center near you. I mean, this is definitely why we wanted to do a webinar like this and start to surface some of these conversations, because they are being talked about, around the globe. And I think this topic is here to stay for quite some time. We do have another question. I would love to hear your views. Let me get it published there. I would love to hear your views on how to structure a generic multi-layer counter UAS approach, considering the sensors you presented. For example, cost efficiency versus and swap of the sensors. Congrats on organizing this. Really appreciated. And that is from our friend Tiago Lanza. Any thoughts on that, guys?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and I think it kind of even falls back to tailoring the equipment you choose to the site you're selecting. Because what are you trying to protect? Is it a 500-meter bubble, or is it 2.5, 3 kilometers? There's a lot of considerations that go into the technology you're going to select and how you're going to layer that technology. But starting with the generic, as I presented, kind of your RF technologies are important to understand those basic protocols, where those drones are coming from, what RF technologies are in your space, and then understanding the physical detection piece. So anything that's doing a GPS waypoint mission around you, whether that's through acoustic technologies or radar, some sort of physical detection that would give you an idea of what's there. So layering those technologies that were presented would be a good start.
Yeah, I think I want to add something to that too. In a very rural environment with not a lot of terrain issues, you may set up one way. But when it comes to an urban environment, like what is mentioned there, a multi-layered counter UAS approach, we found that 1 is none and 2 is 1. So it's always a good idea to deploy with multiple types of systems, because in an urban environment, you never get that ideal location to set your gear. As Casey mentioned, we always had to try to find the least worst location to put the gear. There was very rarely would we get ideal. And there's so many different considerations that come up as to where and how you deploy gear at different special events and stadiums and things like that we had to learn the hard way. But the big important thing that we learned is you can't just rely on one type of detection system or one type of, when we were operating under authorities to use mitigation equipment, we operated with more than one type because you can't put all your eggs in one basket. You have to have multiple types of systems in order to effectively conduct this mission, because there's just so many different variables that you can control, from the type of drone being flown, where it's being flown from, its angle of approach, speed. There's so many different variables that you can control. So the more diverse you are in the types of gear and how you deploy it, the more successful you're going to be. But it's a mission that you can't guarantee you're going to detect, or if you have that authority, they'd be able to mitigate every type of drone. It's a challenging mission.
Awesome. Really appreciate that insight, guys. We'll let everybody get back to their day. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. If you want more information about Skyfire, you can go to skyfireconsulting.com. You can also go over to aerovigilance.com and check out the Counter UAS Hub, which I highly recommend. A great list of vendors and other folks who play in this industry. You can also reach out to us, of course, in LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, any other way you can think to find us. I think we still haven't made a TikTok yet, but we're working on it. So Thank you guys both so much for being here. Really appreciate it. Look forward to continuing our great work together and putting a few more of these webinars on. Thank you all for watching. If you have any other questions, leave them here in the comments, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thank you.